Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to have another look at a premium ship in World of Warships Legends. Today we'll talk about the Tier 7 Soviet battleship Lenin. Though this ship never exists, we will actually start out with some history, then move into analysis, commander choices, stats, and finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around at all, you should see some time codes down in the description to help you out. As far as history, the Lenin never actually exists. Second time I've said that already in less than a minute. The Lenin in-game, though, is the name that Wargaming has assigned to some of the designs collectively known as Project 21. Project 21 was one of the Soviet Union's attempts, begun in the early 1930s, to re-enter the world of naval relevance, with what was perceived to be the pinnacle of naval power, a battleship. Modeled after the development going on in Great Britain on the Nelson-class battleships, in theory the battleship would have been built to treaty standards, in the hopes that Russia and Great Britain could enter some sort of bilateral naval agreement, not unlike the Anglo-German naval agreement in 1935. But obviously, the design that you see here is not built to any treaty standards that could have been reasonably assumed to come into being in the 1930s. For one, this design features 16-inch guns, with alternative designs including 18-inch guns. Plus, in terms of displacement, this is a 68,000-ton design, which is a little overweight. How much overweight? Well, if you take the HMS Nelson and then add to her sister ship, HMS Rodney, and then toss in an HMS Jervis just for good measure, then you have approximately equal weights at standard displacement. Project 21 included several designs, with this one being the heaviest in terms of its weight, but also the lightest in terms of its gun caliber. Like the Nelson-class designs, this met with some skepticism within Soviet ranks. Unlike the Nelson, the project would be cancelled in favor of Project 23, which would be the Soviet Union-class battleship, which at least the Soviet Union gave the old college try in terms of building. The official reason for the cancellation was that, for tactical reasons, which is a little vague, but perhaps even though the Russians had killed most of the people who knew anything about running a navy, they had enough foresight to realize that whoever they fought, they'd probably spend most of the time running away, and placing all of the guns in the front of the ship wasn't going to work out. In any case, the project was canceled. It's a little vague, but there is at least some design work that provides the foundation for the design we see in World of Warships. As far as in World of Warships, though, without dressing it up too much, the Lenin is one of the most powerful Tier 7 battleships in World of Warships Legends. When it comes to the Lenin's strengths, this ship has a very powerful set of 16-inch guns, which seem to have virtually the same characteristics as the Vladivostok. But rather than two forward and one at the rear of the ship, all three guns are mounted with a pair super firing forward, and then a third turret tucked in right behind the second, just like the Nelson. Unlike the Nelson, where you need to think about your positioning and what is shooting at you, the Lenin also shows a daunting armor profile to anyone shooting at it, from anywhere in its forward arc, with the only ship in the game presently capable of overmatching anything but your superstructure being the Yamato. And even then, it stands a very real chance of bouncing off of your turrets or hitting the thickest part of your icebreaker belt. This means that the list of things that you need to do in the Lenin is very short. Basically, it boils down to keep your bow pointed towards the enemy, and as long as you don't show anything much more than the minimum angle needed to fire your third gun, you're probably going to do just fine in this. To give you some additional help, the Lenin has excellent maneuverability, and if you do really screw something up, unlike the Nelson, her second turret actually rotates a full 360 degrees, or so I've been told, making her that much more easy to play. The list of weaknesses for this ship pretty much require you to basically either screw up or just get outpositioned. So basically it boils down to if you don't stay bow on to your enemy. So they are, to elucidate, if you don't stay bow on to your enemy, your citadel is very high and large, and though protected by a heavy belt, it's not tucked behind several armor panels. If you don't stay bow onto your enemy, and one of them gets behind you, you have neither a lot of armor back there, nor any real amount of firepower with which to respond. And if you don't stay bound your enemy, which is a relatively easy thing to do, then you're going to die very quickly in this ship. It basically makes the Lenin one of the least taxing ships in the game to play. Stay bound your enemy. With your excellent maneuverability, this is really pretty easy to do. Use islands to eliminate potential crossfires into the sides of your ship, and just sail on to victory. If you're a battleship playing this thing, pray that you're a Royal Navy battleship, or have really good HE for some other reason. Unless you're the Yamato, shooting at the front of this thing with AP is mostly pointless. If you're a cruiser, shoot HE and pray for fires. Lots of fires, and fire is the thing that's most likely to chew this thing up due to its Russian nature. Jumping next into commanders, when looking at Galler, you're probably going to do this for range and accuracy purposes. You probably need to go in all the way in terms of accuracy if you do want this thing to work. But when you do, the Lenin is actually a very dangerous ship even at long range. Unfortunately, this is going to hurt you in terms of your survivability, because the limited number of heals you get and the reduction to your mobility. In my opinion, this isn't actually all that bad for Lenin because she has enough maneuverability to spare, and even with a 5 or 10% penalty, I found her to be pretty easy to handle even using Galler. Having only 2 heals though sucks, but you can make up for that both with the always powerful Will to Rebuild, but strangely this may be one of the few instances where I might suggest using the Baked Potato skill to reduce fire damage accumulated over time, since the free damage control doesn't seem to come from your limited pool of damage control consumables. I think both of these skills are going to be sort of situational, though both skills do offer some passive benefits that are going to help in every match. My personal favorite does remain Kedrov because the Lenin is extraordinary at pushing a cap. As long as the cap is on one flank, don't drive through the middle of the map with this ship. Having an extra heal or 2 and more powerful heals is how I like to weather the rain of fire, and Firefighter is also pivotal if you want to do that. Now you are going to have to deal with Russian dispersion at its very worst if you choose to do this, and you could go into Brawler, which offers slightly better torpedo visibility and more opportunities to hit, or miss, your target, but this comes at the expense of your range, and not one for nuisance is still a reasonable choice too. The one thing that I can say is that Will to Rebuild is probably better for Kedrov than it is using the Baked Potato skill if you do choose to run Firefighter, which you should. And while base commanders tend to be the unhappy middle ground for most battleships, there are actually some advantages when choosing Von Essen. For one, he has the easiest access to 5 damage control consumables thanks to collective labor and fully packed. And along the way, you're going to pick up an extra heal, and most likely an extra plane, which you're not super likely to need, but the reduced consumable time is going to prove occasionally useful here. Having access to some extra concealment rather than further improving your already good turret traverse is also a pretty decent option since you do have the turret traverse to spare. Finally, it's also worth noting that his base trait is going to give you some additional penetrations every now and again, particularly when your target is in the middle of maneuvering towards or away from you. With 16-inch guns, if you take this ability and it works, you're almost guaranteed to penetrate, but unfortunately, you'll never actually be sure when it's working. In any case, everything else in this kit is pretty boring, but it won't hurt you. When looking at stats, all of the stats that you see on screen are unmodified, with the exception of the detectability, which does include Type 4 camo. I'll be talking about the Lenin mostly in comparison with the Vladivostok, since the ships have many similarities, and as always, it's a good idea to have some experience playing up to the Vladivostok, or at least some other Tier 7 ship before considering purchasing enough resources to purchase this boat. The Lenin has just 63,200 hit points, which is on the low side of average, and puts it a solid 10,400 below Vladivostok. And just raw HP is one of the biggest advantages you'll enjoy in the Vladi rather than the Lenin. Of course, the Lenin doesn't have to expose as much of its side in order to actually get all of its guns into play, which means that the Vladi, if it wants to really dish out the damage, is going to have to risk a lot more than Lenin, which a brief look at its armor profile should tell you this ship is incredibly tough from the front. Essentially what this is telling you is that this ship has an icebreaker bow. The lower half of this bow is impervious to all shells in the game when appropriately angled, and the upper bow can only be penetrated frontally by Yamato AP. The Lenin also has, like most Russian ships, comically limited superstructure, so when dealing damage to this frontally, that is why I would suggest fire and flood are your options. And speaking of torpedoes, the Lenin does come in with a very low 22% torpedo reduction, which is second worst at the tier, behind only the Vladivostok's 21%. The Lenin has 3x3 406mm guns. They range out to 17 kilometers. The 33-second reload is tied for slowest at the tier, right alongside Vladivostok. And the 30-second turret traverse here is exceptionally fast. When shooting HE, you'll see 5,850 damage with a 41% fire chance, and your AP shells can do 13,100. Most of this stuff is exactly what you'll find on the Vladivostok: the damage of your guns, their size and number, and even the effectiveness of your secondary array. Everything that differs here favors the Lenin though. Rather than having the joint worst turret traverse, like the Vladi, you have the joint best, and you're in fact the only 16-inch battleship that has a 30-second turret traverse in the game, though I'm sure that will change eventually. You also have a 100-meter advantage to your main battery gun range, which isn't a big deal, but it gets you a little closer to the 17.2 kilometer average. And then of course, the biggest deal here is just that all three of your turrets are much more accessible. You are able to present all three turrets to most targets without endangering your limited HP pool. With a speed of 28.5 knots, the Lenin isn't incredibly fast, a little more than 1 knot slower than the average, with the South Dakota class American ships and the Monarch currently being the only battleship slower at the tier. But this 840-meter turning circle is pretty much middle of the pack, and where she really shines is that she has the fastest rudder of any Tier 7 battleship, with just 13.5. This compares favorably with Vladivostok, which feels a lot more cumbersome because her turning circle is a full football field wider. And another thing worthy of note here is that in order to use all of your firepower in Lenin, you also have to do considerably less maneuvering than Vladivostok, so another big advantage for Lenin. The base sea detectability for Vladivostok is 15.4, and of course here you can see with its camo on. With a 12.3 detection from air, that makes her the exact average for Tier 7 battleships. For what it's worth, Vladivostok has a 100-meter advantage over Lenin when being spotted by sea or air. But because these are both very visible battleships, this isn't a huge advantage. The selection of consumables is pretty standard, and only noteworthy to remind anyone thinking about getting the Lenin that there are some limitations. As a Soviet battleship, you have a limited number of damage control parties. The Lenin has the Soviet standard of 3. In spite of this limitation, there are some advantages, namely the short recharge, which can occasionally save you from taking tons of damage, but if used too liberally, will result in you taking a lot of damage later in the game. The Soviets also have fewer repair parties, with just 2 rather than the standard 3, but other than that, they're pretty standard in their effectiveness. In your final slot, you have the choice between a fighter plane, a spotter plane, or enhanced secondary consumable. The fighter plane is going to be more advantageous if you're going to push objectives, since it stays aloft, spotting over islands and smoke for up to 90 seconds, and may be more helpful once there are carriers out there in the future. The spotter is useful when shooting at pretty much anything over 9 kilometers away, because after that point, Soviet accuracy tends to get a little special. And the secondary consumable should be used if you want to die a horrible death and go back to port, because by the time most of your secondaries are going to be able to shoot at the enemy, almost every ship is going to either bury battleship shells in your exposed citadel, or a half a dozen torpedoes in your side, or if you're really lucky, both. And finally, we're going to get into a bit of gameplay, as promised. As the game starts out in our Lenin, I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. Pretty uninspired choices here. We've got Galler. This is a mostly accuracy-centered build with a little bit of extra damage thrown in for good measure. Now, as we start off the game, you can see there's only one destroyer on the enemy team, which is good news for me because that means there are very few ships that are going to be able to torpedo me. And that basically means that there's less for me to really be all that worried about. And what we're doing right now is essentially, I'm sailing towards this island off to the east. Essentially, I want to put it right against the side of my ship to cut down on the number of people who can shoot across the map right into my juicy broadside. While we're doing that, we're keeping our guns out there past the Abbey, just in case somebody pops up. And there you see our first potential victim. I do go ahead and shoot out there at that island. You know, sometimes you don't notice the little icon telling you that you are basically just destroying wildlife. So we hit an island. It's a tradition that we haven't pointed out in quite some time, but a tradition nonetheless. Now we're just checking out who exactly is inside of our will to rebuild range. And obviously we got another battleship coming up here on our port side. And as we push a little bit more forward, this is really kind of the area where you start to wonder, am I getting overextended? Because as we come up on this little gap in the island, you know, somebody could theoretically go through there. As we fire, we do take a number of shots from the folks down south. That is not too bad. As you can see, we've weathered the storm pretty well, and though we haven't done much damage at all, you know, for the most part, nobody else has done much damage at all either. Now, Roma looks like he has the growing sense that maybe he's a little bit out of position. Not really his fault. I'm not really sure what you would expect him to do. And as we scoot up here, it looks like he's again going outside, trying to get himself out of this situation. Our guns reload. We go ahead and shoot that spotter plane up into the air. And aided by a little bit extra accuracy, we do manage to delete him. These 16-inch guns, very punchy if properly aimed, and even at range there you can see the commander system working to my advantage. Now, Bismarck should be a pretty tough nut to crack, but might as well shoot at him because all sorts of weird things happen when you shoot at a Bismarck. In this case, we get 20,000 damage, so, you know, I'll take it. Even without a citadel there, obviously a pretty good damage amount. Now, I will point out that I'm not quite at a 45-degree angle to the ship that's furthest to the east there who can shoot at me. And I really should be trying to do that. And as you can see, we take another hit from the Bismarck. But even sitting still, we're in a position where, honestly, that Iowa can't do a whole lot to me. Iowa is actually one of the ships that I would want to be most worried about because his improved penetration angles are going to make this sort of scenario a little bit more dangerous because he has a chance to penetrate me even beyond the normal 45 degrees. Probably somewhere in the area of what I'm at right now. And American ships would be one of the few sets of ships that I would suggest you really might want to consider not giving them this minimum angle. If I'd done a little bit more maneuvering, I could probably save myself a little bit more damage, but I mean, for the most part, you can see people continue to shoot into the side of my ship, and people continue to be disappointed with what they walk away with. For better or worse, this is what it's like to play a Lenin. Not a terribly engaging ship if you play it right. As you can see, Iowa, we've got a Jean Bart out there, and we've got the Bismarck. None of these guys are going to be able to really dig me out of this position unless they want to start shooting a lot of high explosive, and my guess is that not many of them are going to want to do that. You can see I'm just following around that Iowa, hoping to get a nice juicy broadside in on him. We do manage to land a healthy hit, including one Citadel, and we're still just sitting here. In spite of the several shells that we took, we still are in really good position overall in terms of our hit points. We have used one of our two heals, which is not fantastic. It's one of the things I really don't like about playing Russian battleships. Another one would be that this isn't all that challenging. And also, this ship is not very pretty. It doesn't look... It looks like they were trying to copy a Nelson, and then they're like, what if we made it bigger? And then it was like, good idea, comrade. And then they didn't finish it. Because that rear quarterdeck looks really silly. In any case, we are pushing in towards sea. Our enemies here haven't put up too much of a fight. Not that they would be able to. In order to really do a lot of damage to the Lenin, you do kind of have to just wear it down and hope you can wear out, hope you can get rid of all of those damage cons. As you can see, the Bismarck is shooting all sorts of its secondaries at me. This isn't really a big deal. Slow reload here is maybe not ideal for brawling. But as you see, we just go ahead, shoot high. We manage to land a whole bunch of damage into his superstructure. And then we're okay. This is probably the most dangerous maneuver I'm going to do the entire game. And that is because for a few seconds I am going to give up my broadside to the enemy way out there. But he has a lot of other things to worry about, and I am definitely not the closest battleship looking to pick on him. And almost as soon as we look over there, you can see our turrets are pretty much on target again. And that's really kind of the Lenin through and through. Turrets are fast. As you can see, we're having no problems maneuvering. We're not incredibly fast by any stretch of the imagination, but we're not so slow that it's super, super painful. And in terms of pushing a flank, just being implacable is probably good enough for most battleships. We do switch over to HE, expecting that guy is going to continue to back up. He disappoints us, which is fine, whatever. I have a sneaking suspicion it is not going to affect the outcome of the game. And after we set loose our next set of shells, we do switch over to AP, just on the odd chance he doesn't torpedo our battleship, which obviously he does. We're going to take a lazy turn here, and even though we're not really under any threat of being shot here, you can see the turn here is okay. The rudder shift is pretty good, and no matter what direction we move, our turrets are very responsive in terms of getting the barrels pointed downrange in the right direction. For the most part, this ship is shaped like a giant arrow, and as long as you are pointing that arrow mostly, if not entirely, towards the enemy, you are going to come away with some pretty good results. I am going to go ahead and speed this up, get to the end of the game, because honestly, you can pretty well tell that I'm not going to be contributing anymore. And this ship sails just as well as any other in a straight line. So, closing thoughts on the Lenin. This ship is both extremely powerful and extremely easy to play. If there's one balancing factor to it, it's that if you do offer yourself up to the enemy by giving them a full, juicy broadside, then the Lenin can be taken out pretty quickly. Really, unless you're pushing way too hard or the rest of your team collapses, and usually this requires a combination of those two things, there's not a lot of challenge to keeping things pretty under control and playing to the Lenin's strengths. You've got the maneuverability, you've got incredible front armor, you've got 9 16-inch guns, all faced more or less completely forward. Currently, of course, the only way to get the Lenin is through a combination of material resources or having a lot of extra time on your hand. If she's really worth it for you, that's really going to depend on your own personal circumstances. For me, I think this is just a bit too easy, and I imagine that folks who play a lot of this ship will probably develop a reputation for being tryhards. It's a little too mindless for me. And if I do pick her up in the future, it'll probably be when the cost is a little bit more in my price range in terms of money, or more importantly, time. In any case, those are my thoughts on the Lenin. Hope you all enjoyed this little review, and I do hope to see you on the next one.